So you find us live at 5 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. If you've just joined in, you missed out. You've missed out on a lot. But you are still spoiled for choice in terms of what we have on the agenda as we go into the last hour of the show. We're going to go into Africa in a moment with Tapiwa Diamond Charter. And later on, we'll go into song. We'll close the show off later on with a guest here in studio, an Afro House DJ and producer, better known as Wex TBK. So Wex has dropped. There's an EP that we're going to profile this morning, and we'll be welcoming him into the studio at the bottom of the hour. But I want us to go into Africa now and look at developments coming out of Tanzania. I'm not sure if you've been watching the elections. There was even the swearing in earlier on in the week, looking at the presidency there. But we see also the African Union releasing a statement worried about concerns where these post-elections developments are concerned. So in our Africa Fridays feature this morning, we're looking at the African Union. We're looking at their power, their teeth here. The AU's election monitoring arm, which sent about 72 observers. This would be a team moving into Tanzania and into Zanzibar for the October 29th elections, pointing out to ballot stuffing. They're talking about government-imposed internet blackout. There are allegations of excessive military force, also politically motivated abductions. People's lives have been lost here. They're saying all of these points to a compromised election integrity in these countries. Claims as well that the elections did not comply with the AU principles, the normative frameworks and other international obligations and the standards for democratic elections. So this morning we're reflecting on this and how really all of these issues that have been flagged can see either the reversal of these elections or it's a statement. It remains that then things would move as they move in Tanzania, in Zanzibar, where we saw them send these 72 observers. So we're talking about this this morning on 0861 987 000. There on X, we go by at Power FM 987 at Katlego, Legodi _ Tapiwa. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning to you, and good morning to the listeners of Power FM from the length, width, breadth, and the rest of the world. It is always a pleasure to be part and parcel of this magnificent show. So thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure having you on the show so we can break down some of these developments coming out of the continent. And we know very well that as Africa continues to consolidate its democratic gains, the role of continental and regional institutions in safeguarding peace, stability, and credible elections has never been more vital. I mean, we've been looking at and observing developments coming out of Tanzania. For instance, we saw the AU releasing a report as well. SADC is also worried about all of these developments. We see regional bodies as well, such as the East African Community, also just looking at all of these developments, right? They're always in the forefront of ensuring that the elections serve as a true reflection of the people's will. And we see them saying what happened in Tanzania, for instance, does not speak to that. It has drawn increased attention. And once again, we see these institutions now flagging some of the developments where these elections in Tanzania are concerned. Let's talk to Tapiwa, the AU.
No, thank you very much for in response to that. I just want to congratulate you. I forgot to do it on the last occasion for 40 under 40. So thank you for the great and amazing work that you've been doing.
Oh, thank you very much, man. Yeah, really, really appreciate it.
Yes.
I'm struggling to hear you a bit. Maybe just move around, Muna, so we can hear you a proper Tapiwa.
Move. Just probably give me just 1 second to move to a probably much better.
Awesome. No problem. We'll give you that minute. But yeah, Tapiwa congratulating me there. The flowers are still coming. Oh, well, appreciated. But Tapiwa is coming through to help us look at some of these developments. I told you that they're concerns, right? They're concerns coming out of the continent. The African Union, we often ask, right, as to where are these regional bodies? Where do we see them in helping us move? the elections. Usually when there are elections on the continent, it will be a tense moment as well, because a lot tend to come out of these elections. But this time around, we're looking at developments coming out of Tanzania. We saw them release a statement, right? This statement would speak to what they observed here, the African Union's election monitoring arm. This monitoring arm sent about 72 observers into Tanzania, into Zanzibar. There were elections there last month on the 29th of October. There were elections, and we see them saying that really these elections pointed to concerns that have been highlighted, that have been outlined here. And they're saying that this would point to business not being usual in Tanzania, because they want intervention. They do want intervention, but we see just things on the move in Tanzania. For instance, earlier on in the week, we saw the president, Samia Suluhu Hassan. She was sworn in. She was sworn in. People are saying that they've been denied fair elections. The elections have been disputed, but she was sworn in. We see that Tanzania, concerns that they fail to comply with the democratic standards, at least as per what the African Union is saying here. But the President Hassan pledging unity after the deadly post-elections and this unrest that has been playing out in Tanzania. Is there a reason to worry here, especially as per the AU and what we see them, flagging here, Tapiwa? I mean, all of these comes as we saw the president being installed, this being Samia Suluhu Hassan. Welcome back, Tapiwa.
No, thank you very much. Well, as far as the African Union concerned, this becomes a catch-22 scenario. This becomes a reality of the fact that the African Union, it's only back. Probably let's not even say it's only back. It's just a sign. When you are in our elections or our houses, where there's a sign that says, beware of the dog, and you never get to see the dog. That is the reality of the African Union. What is said, or at this particular point in time, is what the African Union initially said, after the elections in Tanzania, because the chairperson, initially congratulated the president-elect of Tanzania. That was on the 1st of November 2025, where chairperson His Excellency Mohamed Ali Yusuf. He had a congratulatory message that is still available on the African Union website, where he congratulated, Chama Cha Mapinduzi for winning the election. And obviously, in addition to that, he said, look, there's regret, to the loss of life, and he offered these condolences to the families of and friends and to those who had lost loved ones, and underscored the importance of free and fair elections, stating that upholding fundamental rights and freedoms is key, and, respecting the right to peaceful assembly and expression, and encouraging the authorities of Tanzania to safeguard the rights, the human rights, in the country, and also called on the citizens, to exercise peaceful and to conduct themselves in a reasonable manner. So, when we look at the African Charter of Democracy, elections and governance in particular, the role in terms of the human law, role of law, the human rights, the fundamental freedoms, the political pluralism, which are the cornerstone to democracy and stable societies, all those principles, the rules and regulations, they were not met in these elections, So the African Union in that statement further clarified and stated that and pledged that they are there willing to support people in Tanzania in efforts to preserve peace and national cohesion and democracy, So this, for me, looking at how the electoral field was, it was not a secret that the political field in Tanzania in these past elections was not free and fair. We look at the formidable challenges, to the presidency. They were all either jailed or they were banned from taking part in the elections. Tundu Lissu has been arrested for the longest of times on trumped-up treason charges,
which disqualified him from taking part in the elections. So there was no one out of the 16, presidential candidates. None of them has a real political party and enough backing in Tanzania. Most of those, they were simply, let me call them briefcase political parties, which would have never posed any serious threat or challenge to Madam Hassan. So the African Union, then a few days after, they came back and slammed, the Tanzanian election, saying that it was not free and fair. It was violent. There were irregularities, and speaking about the internet shutdown and so on and so forth. This was then, a report coming from the observer mission team, which was led by the former president of Botswana, Mokgweetsi Masisi. So in that, in the preliminary report which they have produced, they did not hide, the fact that the electoral playing field was not free and fair. So we now are sitting on two contrasting developments. The first one is the chairperson, Mohamed Ali Yusuf, congratulating, the president of Tanzania. Yeah. Then days after, we now have the observer mission, coming out and slamming the election in Tanzania. So there is serious contradictions, from the African Union, because those have been mandated to go and observe the elections. Their report, we did not wait for their report. We simply congratulated the leaders. Yet we knew as leaders of the African Union and understood, how terror was unleashed in Tanzania.
And when you look at all of these developments, won't one, or will one be a little bit disingenuous when they say this report and all of these developments are just reactive? We've seen a lot already coming out of Tanzania. Earlier on in the week, we saw the president being sworn in. So if this statement from the AU, and if we are seeing them saying that the elections there did not follow normative frameworks and other international obligations and standard for democratic elections, isn't it a little too late? What does this statement do? Because we hear as well that the tensions would still exist on the ground.
No, definitely, it is a little too late. When we speak of, an organization which has power and authority, we normally say we have measures, preventative measures, and we intervene at particular instances, But we have spoken about this over and over again, where we challenged the powers of the African Union. We were challenging the powers of even the African Union Parliament, where we said they only have powers to recommend or simply powers to just, produce a statement, without them, going directly into the field and try and change, instill probably some changes into the country. The African Union lacks those powers, together with some regional bodies. ECOWAS might still be having a little bit of power because we know they still have the power to impose sanctions on any of its member states if they assume and think that one of the member states was a bit wayward. But then for the African Union, in terms of power and authority, they seriously do not have, any means of power besides the power to make a statement. We saw, the fact that there were no reforms, in Tanzania, where the opposition leaders, in terms of what they were putting on the table as reforms, these are things which could easily have been attained in Tanzania. Part of it was to say we need to be able to have the power, just the power to exercise our rights to challenge the outcome of the elections. Because once the elections are announced in Tanzania, you are not able to go and challenge them. Yeah. Those, according to the rules and regulations of Tanzania, that power is not there. That right to challenge the outcome, irrespective of the shortfalls and the shortcomings, you simply can't challenge it. It is final. Whatever declaration is made, it goes. It is final. It cannot be challenged. One of the other issues that the opposition parties had put on the table in terms of having changes was to say the president is the one who appoints the members of the electoral committee, which is supposed to be independent. But in this instance, all the powers, they lie in the president. And they were challenging that to say, at least let it be from the parliament, not solely the responsibility of the president. And none of those easy reforms were done or instilled in Tanzania. What the government did was to shut down all forms and cornerstones of having a plausible issues or plausible environment to have democracy in the country. The media was attacked. Any journalists who were producing news or interviewing opposition leaders, anyone that challenged the government, they were arrested, detained, kidnapped, abducted, killed, and there was a lot of force which was used. There was a lot of human rights abuses which happened in Tanzania, and all of this was in the face of the African Union, together with East African Community, which is the new baby which was formed in 2000 with 8 countries, where Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya are the founding members. And then you had Burundi and Rwanda, who joined in 2007, and South Sudan in 2016, the DRC in 2023, and Somalia being the 8th country which joined in 2024. So if you look at the countries, in the East African Committee, look, there's no hope. I don't even expect, South Sudan to say anything negative, about Tanzania. I don't even expect, Burundi, Rwanda, the DRC, and Somalia, because already even Uganda, already they're embroiled, in their own challenges, and Tanzania probably is far better off, in terms of the economics and in terms of the politics. So none of these will be able to instill sanctions or to challenge, how things have been in Tanzania. So it is a sad scenario at this particular point in time, supported obviously by the statements and the sentiments from the African Union, which is completely, baffling, primarily because the cornerstones of democracy, which are crystal clear based on the African Charter for Human Rights, Tanzania missed it by miles. So it is a sad story of whatever is emanating in Tanzania.
What can be done, Tapiwa? I mean, when you look at what has happened there in Tanzania, you would say this does set a bad precedence for the continent, looking at how we administer elections. There were concerns, for instance, from the SADC region coming out of Zimbabwe, when Zimbabwe held its elections. And it does look like, this is a threat, something that would more or less cast and put us in a little bit of a pickle as a continent here, looking at the fact that it does look like those democratic processes, the democratic elections and the standards for those democratic elections are still null. They're still non-existent in some of these countries on the continent. And it doesn't look like we have the hang of how we can then in any way ensure that there's accountability where some of these developments are concerned. We often talk about the role of the SADC. We often talk about the role of the AU. We look at how all of these bodies would come through in consolidating maybe their efforts to protect the democratic gains or democratic prospects of some of these countries. What do we do? Do we just basically say it is what it is and we move when there is an indictment and this having the potential to cast the entire continent in bad light?
So I now have to refer back to what the elder statesman, former President Thabo Mbeki, said when he was making reference to what was happening in Zimbabwe, where he said the issues of the people of Zimbabwe must be dealt with by the people of Zimbabwe. I've seen that to be the only, solution when we look at the issues for most of the African countries. We saw issues in Madagascar recently, and Madagascar had just taken over the chairmanship of SADC, and the people went into the streets. The youth were in the streets, and we saw the government being toppled over, and Rajolina left power, and it left a serious void on SADC because now Madagascar, Antananarivo was the chairman was now the chairman that just taken over from Zimbabwe as the chairman of SADC. And when the president lost power, it then means that currently, there was a void in terms of leadership. Then South Africa had to be given, the interim chairmanship and leadership role in the SADC region. That on its own, it tells us that, SADC on its own did not make that decision, to go and intervene in whatever was happening in Madagascar. The very same thing applies now to what has been happening in Tanzania. And when we speak of Tanzania, Tanzania is the capital city of democracy, especially for the frontline states, especially for the southern states, because during the liberation movement, all the liberation movements, they were based in Tanzania. They went to exile in Tanzania. They were housed in Tanzania. They were taught fighting in Tanzania. They sought refuge in Tanzania, and Tanzania became the epicenter of the liberation movements. So there's serious history to protect as far as Tanzania is concerned. That's why everyone ought to be very sensitive, as far as upholding the basic principles of democracy. But when we look at these regional bodies on their own, before we get to the regional bodies, these regional bodies have got their own members, which are individual states. If you have Zimbabwe as part and parcel of SADC saying that congratulations to Chama Pinduzi for winning the election, then you have the Zambian president, HH, also sending congratulatory messages to Tanzania immediately after the election and when people are in the streets. All those presidents, they send, and their entourage, or they went there personally for the inauguration, which was held in the barracks for that matter, where security was tight. If I've won an election with 97, 98%, why should I be scared to go into the national stadium for the inauguration? So you can't protect yourself from the very same crowds that have elected you, if indeed they've elected you. So when you have these individual leaders, congratulating a leader whose election, whose win has been marred by violence and all sorts of shortcomings. We're talking about violent crackdown, the internet blackout, the polling irregularities, and all, the uncompetitive processes as far as elections are concerned. But individual leaders have come out and said their congratulatory remarks. They've even gone and attended in the barracks the inauguration. Then it means that we need new leaders. This is what one of the young upcoming leaders, has been saying. I think it's Advocate Fadzai Mahere from SADC. She has been saying we need new leaders. And this explains, why Africa will always be behind, primarily because the leaders that we have are not completely sold out to attaining democracy and peace in our countries. If we can't, merely hold an election, if leaders kill people, and they steal an election, because the time it took the people of Tanzania to count the elections is unprecedented, for physical ballot boxes for them to count. It was within a very short period of time. If we can't hold an election, how then do we expect these leaders, to drive change, positive change within our communities? This is why you then have external leaders like Donald Trump calling Africa all sorts of names. It is primarily because as Africans, as African leaders, we have not respected our own people. We have not respected the offices that we occupy. And we have not, lifted the African flag at a different level. We are simply, going 2 steps forward and 25 steps backward in terms of how we lead. So it then, leaves the international community, in disarray, and they have serious opinions about Africa.
And I'm not sure, Tapiwa, if you saw, a statement coming out of the United States or developments around Donald Trump, where he's now even threatened, and we know very well that he's not coming into South Africa for the G20, but now even going to say that he wants Africa out of the G20, going into the future. We are going into the World Summit as well, but he's scathing. His latest criticism is that really he does not think that the country should be part of the G20 any longer. And one of our callers earlier on saying that we now need to see Africa unite, and one would look at some of these bodies, the AU, SADC, and the likes, to say that, more or less, there should be somewhat of a pushback here. There's a narrative that he's creating as well, that the country is hosting, South Africa is hosting of this upcoming G20 in 15 days' time is something that, should not in any way receive, all the attention. Is casting doubt on our hosting of a credible G20 World Leaders Summit in the next 15 days. What do we do? What does Africa do? What become the lessons that we learn from Donald Trump's tenure, for instance, looking at how he's come through second time around, and this time around it does look like he's shaking things up. What do we do as a continent? What do you make of him saying that we should be removed as South Africa from the G20?
So what we have seen, we have seen Donald Trump taking a fresh aim at two of Africa's biggest economies. He has taken aim at Nigeria.
Yeah.
He has taken aim at South Africa. Saying South Africa should not be part and parcel of that, of the G20. He has taken aim of Nigeria for the government, saying that the government of Nigeria has failed to deal with the massacres of the Christians. And before we even go say, where is Donald Trump getting these powers from? Mind you, he's part and parcel of the peace deals in most of the African countries. He's part and parcel of the peace deal in the DRC, where he said this is the biggest thing that he has done. He's also part and parcel of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the issues between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, as far as the waters are concerned, in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So the African Union has not been able to take its position, in terms of protecting Africa, in terms of leading Africa by an example. We say we want a United States of Africa, but the African Union has dismally failed Africa. As a result, when we even speak of a joint African Union, which is just for Africans, which is just an opportunity to say, let us join hands as Africans. Trust me, I don't see that happening with the type of leaders that we currently have. We have had ample opportunities to join hands as Africans, but we have failed to do so. During COVID, we discovered that the intra-trade, just the trade amongst African states, is sitting at about 13 to 16%. Yet other continents, their trade within their continents, is way above 65%. We rely on China, that is Asia, in terms of our commodities imports. We rely a lot on USA. USA is the biggest trading partner, not just for South Africa, but for the African continent at large. We rely, with a lot of donor funding emanating from the United States of America. So we are practically depending on the United States of America. So most of the African countries that we have, they are not standing on their own, but the leaders, let me say the leaders, because it is these leaders now who are selling the African nations, for half a penny to the United States of America. So with the leaders that we have now, who on a daily basis continue to go to Wall Street and borrow money from the ruthless lenders, where we know that the percentage, if an African country is different to that percentage that is given to a European country. We know that the moment you get, money from Wall Street, that is your IMF, and the World Bank and other private lenders, you practically selling your soul, and you will not be able to recover from that. But we have seen African leaders going over and over again to go and borrow. So we can't, with the type of leaders that we have, we cannot even begin speaking about a united Africa, where we as Africans join hands, primarily because we have had leaders who have continued to divide Africa, leaders who are not completely sold out to put Africa first, leaders who are not sold out to do just the basics, leaders who don't put roads in their own countries, where there's no education, where there's no health. So when we get the simple things wrong, we simply will not be able to go and attain the Africa 2063 agenda aspiration. If we look at how we have missed some of the goals, as an example, we always speak about the silencing of guns in Africa, which was a goal which was supposed to have been attained by 2020. But 5-6 years down the line, none of the current leaders are speaking about that. But we are still saying 2063 agenda aspiration. We will make sure that we will have all our SDGs in place. But we simply cannot get the basics right. So we are living in a world of make-believe. And as a result, we are now living at the mercy of Donald Trump, the Western countries, and the Asian countries.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that we'll need to do in terms of getting it right. I'm not sure if this will even happen in our lifetime, but there's a need to ensure that those leaders come through, and they come through fast, because it can't then be business as usual when we are often told as well, Tapiwa, that we are endowed with all of these minerals. We hold the power, the key as a continent, but yet we are so poor. Things are not happening the way that they should. We are at the back end, and this position has to change, and we do indeed need new leaders that will help us here. But I don't know, Tapiwa, I want us to leave it here, man. We're out of time, but always appreciate your thoughts. Always, love starting the day with you. Love talking the continent with you. Do take care of yourself. Let's stay in prayer. Let's stay hopeful that at least maybe one day the guns would be silent, and all of these developments would be a thing of the past for our children and our children's children. We do need to, in any way, get our house in order as a continent. Thank you very much, Tapiwa, for coming through.
Thank you for having me. Asante sana.
Awesome, man. Tapiwa Diamond Chaza joining us this morning as an Afro expert in democracy, governance, and human rights. And this is where we're looking at developments coming out of Tanzania. But we see the African Union raising concerns here. This would be, alarming concerns around how things have not been faring well there in Tanzania post the elections. We see them just telling us about how really, when you look at it, there's a need now more than ever to ensure that we get it going. The election monitoring arm of the AU, the observers, saying that what could have happened there, it points to something untoward, a ballot stuffing, government-imposed internet blackouts, allegations of excessive military force, the politically motivated abductions, we're told, but all of these compromising the integrity of the elections, democratic elections, and also these international obligations and the standards for the elections to be free and fair. I don't know where we can base our hope. And here, Donald Trump even saying that we should be removed as South Africa from the G20. 15 days to go before we host the world. Let's break a bit. When we come back, we end the show, at least on a lighter note.